What is going on, everybody? It's your boy Gsluke here with a Monday Night Football preview for the game between the 49ers and the Cardinals. We've already got some injury news that has impacted the slate quite a bit. We knew about Zach Ertz last week, but now Kyler Murray has already been announced as out. You're going to have Colt McCoy starting for the Cardinals. And anytime you have a 10-point spread and a lot of the chalk coming in on one side, that being the 49ers, there's going to be a lot of interesting type of scripts that we might want to enter for tonight. So quite a bit to talk about, and that's what we're going to do here, right? Get you prepared for the Showdown slate with all the information that you need. So let's go ahead and get this thing started. Already got our projections up, and just before we go player by player, in terms of your game script, the Vegas totals, it's a 43.5 point over under with a 10-point spread favoring the 49ers side. That to me just seems a little bit egregious. I thought 7 points was probably adequate here. I think having Kyler Murray out probably has a lot to do with that line movement. But Colt McCoy, he looked pretty damn decent last week. He was able to make all of the throws. And while he doesn't bring the same sort of athleticism or rushing upside for the fantasy perspective as a Kyler Murray, he's still capable of feeding wide receivers. Getting DeAndre Hopkins 14 targets, getting players like a Rondale Moore even more involved into the offense are going to still be viable options, even with the movement from a Murray down to a McCoy. So in terms of attacking this slate, the chalk is going to be on the 49ers. And really, I thought the ownership would be on more of the rushing ability players, like a McCaffrey, right? He brings, dual threat ability. But I thought guys, like backup running back Eli Mitchell might get a little bit of run. A Deebo Samuel, who's involved in the running game. Defenses, I thought that the 49ers defense might be a little bit higher owned, but it seems like the pass catchers, Christian McCaffrey's mega chalk, which you probably could have seen coming, but you have a lot of chalk on, a Deebo probably through the air, a lot of people getting to Jimmy Garoppolo, nearly, 70% owned between both spots there. I don't know. I don't see it being Jimmy Garoppolo dissecting the Cardinals defense. And sure, their pass defense has been really shoddy this year, nowhere near as sharp as what we've seen over the past few years. But Jimmy Garoppolo is also not a stud quarterback, right? He's not throwing for 350 plus yards very often. So if you're going to take this 49ers side, we'll go through it when we go player by player. I like more of the rushing heavy scripts where maybe it's the defense that gets there, a kicker for the 49ers side, rather than a lot of the points coming throughout the air. And while I still think Garoppolo is playable, I am not nearly as on him as the rest of the field. So he's somebody I'll be under the field on, but we'll touch on all of those implications, the sort of scripts that I'm considering as we go player by player and how we can actually dish them out. So let's start up top with Christian McCaffrey. Like I said, I understand why he's chalk, and I think even in a rushing heavy script that he can get there, obviously as a running back for that team favored by 10 points, but I don't think he has to be a lock here. There are definitely scripts, particularly because he's $11,400, where maybe he's not optimal at the captain. If you look at his box score, particularly for the 49ers, he's just been on another level when it comes to his production. But maybe I'm going to use him a little bit more at the flex spot than I am at captain. So I could see myself playing him in like maybe 60% of my lineups at the flex spot. You can see I have him in my captain pool. But I don't know how excited I am about that, right? He's 20% owned. If you're going to get leverage, you have to play him in, hypothetically 40% of your lineups. That's something that I don't see myself doing because there's just other guys, and particularly these three that I have highlighted down here, that I think bring a little bit more unique game scripts into mind, right? Scripts that aren't going to be nearly as played by the rest of the field, and I think are almost just as viable as the Christian McCaffrey nuke game, where he goes out there, scores 25 to 30 fantasy points. Because the one thing that people don't consider about McCaffrey here is the price tag. At captain, he's over $17,000. And to pay off that price tag at captain, he's going to have to outscore the rest of the field by probably at least 7 points, 5 to 7 points. Obviously, if a DeAndre Hopkins ends up being the second highest scorer, that gap is going to be a little bit smaller than it would be if one of these mid-tier guys ends up going off. But let's see, a James Conner or Deebo Samuel, we'll talk about them a little bit later. They are more than viable to also post 20 to 25 fantasy points. And unless Christian McCaffrey's posting a 30 burger, he might not be who you have to have there, right? Because that salary, let's see, an extra $5,000 here is spending up from maybe a 49ers defense to a Colt McCoy or a Jimmy Garoppolo. That's a massive difference when it comes to your median projection. So that's what I wanted to touch on there. You can see he's in my pool right now at both spots. I don't know if that's going to last. I kind of foresee myself not playing him at captain and maybe just taking 60, 75%, something like that at the flex spot. Kyler Murray's out. I kind of wish he was playing because he does have that rushing upside, but it does simplify the the rates over there on the Cardinals side. We know that they're going to be a little bit more traditional. A lot more of their rushing attack is going to be with actual running backs as opposed to a dual threat between Murray and James Conner. So it gives a significant boost to somebody like a James Conner, also to a Keontae Ingram down there at $2,600. They're projected for a solid 5 to 10% higher rush share than they would have with somebody like a Murray at the helm. You also have better production for somebody like a Rondale Moore. So Kyler Murray, a little bit more explosive, will make plays longer, right? He'll extend plays with his legs. So somebody like a Rondale Moore, who's a little bit more of a short route specialist. I mean, his ADOT, right? He was kind of getting shit on it for the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season here by a lot of us analysts, people that are looking at the analytics. But Rondale Moore with Colt McCoy, more of a traditional quarterback, can get to those slot routes, the drag routes over the middle, the little flat routes to the outside. He's able to complete those a little bit more often because they're not scripting rollouts or bootlegs for somebody like a Kyler Murray very often. So, the quarterback change isn't just, important in terms of the line, in terms of some of the scripts, but also the usage of other players on the Cardinals. So I think it opens up a little bit of value. So I wanted to touch on that, and we'll touch even more on Colt McCoy here in a second. But DeAndre Hopkins, probably my favorite play on the slate. You can see I only have him 8% owned at the captain slot, and if that ends up holding up, I expect that to go up. People have got to come along on this guy. He had 14 targets last week, and ever since he's returned, he's arguably been the best fantasy wide receiver in the NFL. And I don't think that's really a stretch, particularly when you look at his points per game. He had that one dud performance, but outside of that, he's just been on an absolute tear here. I have him projected for nearly 19 fantasy points. That is even with Colt McCoy. And last week, though he didn't get into the end zone, he had like 10 catches for like 98 yards, something like that. Just outrageous stuff. 41% owned. Again, the 8% at the captain is really what I have my eye on here, because I could see myself playing him in a third of my lineups at captain, if not more. He's, in terms of an optimal rate at captain, the last time I checked, it was over 25% optimal at captain. He was being owned at 8% of lineups. That's one of the better spots that you're going to find. So I really do like DeAndre Hopkins in this spot, particularly because he had a knack with Colt McCoy the last time out. He looked his way more often than anyone else, and has just been an absolute beast since returning. And even though it might be a little bit controversial, right? He took the good old steroids. They're clearly helping him. He's going out there and killing it. So maybe they should have different countermeasures for when people are taking these PEDs, because they're coming back and they're still obviously reaping the benefits of them. You saw that in MMA. What was his name? Good old, he came back a few years ago. He was on the juice. He was on the cardio stuff. He came back, almost ended up winning a title. Luckily, ended up getting it was TJ Dillashaw, ended up getting taken out. Luckily, that's why I say it's controversial, right? It doesn't feel good that these guys are absolutely going off. But that's the way the rules are. They're able to play, and I still think they're taking advantage of it, let alone other people will contest that. Again, I'm not a doctor, but I don't know. I've just seen too many examples. Like TJ Dillashaw was one of the big ones for me. Next up, we got Jimmy Garoppolo. I'm definitely going to be under the field here. We already touched on that. I just don't see them, especially if they're 10-point favorites, right? If we're just looking at the Vegas script, do we think if they're going to be playing from ahead for most of the game, like a 10-point spread would imply, like maybe a 2-touchdown lead, that they're just going to pass the ball over the Cardinals? They're a rush-first team. We know that Shanahan loves to run the ball. I do not foresee them throwing the ball 40, 50 times this game, unless it's an extremely close game, unless it's going to be like a 3-3 script, right, where it's a 3 to 5 point game by the end of it. Then Jimmy Garoppolo makes sense. So a lot of my exposure here, and it's not going to be very much for tonight, is going to be in a competitive script, right? Where maybe I'm taking a Colt McCoy, I'm taking both quarterbacks in the same lineup. I think I'm a lot more likely to play both quarterbacks together than I am independently, or at least I should say Jimmy Garoppolo, right? Together with a Colt McCoy than maybe Jimmy Garoppolo by himself. I definitely will have lineups with Colt McCoy by himself, who I guess we'll talk about right now. The same price as Jimmy G, which is definitely a little bit overpriced, but that's why he's coming in nearly half his owned, right? Only 40% at flex, 7% at the captain, which I'd think about using him at captain, but I don't know if I'm going to go that far. I like his chances. I mean, he's a pocket passer. He's only in the 9K range, so it's not like he's an $11,000 Kyler Murray. I mean, if he posts something like 15 to 18 fantasy points, that's going to be in the optimal lineup. I mean, at $9,600, you're going to have to jam that in, unless it's a 70, 80 point game in terms of your total score, right? And that's not going to happen here. It's projected for closer to 43 and a half points the last time I checked. So Colt McCoy, I like him. I think that he's going to go a little bit under-owned because he is, a backup quarterback coming in, but he's still getting a fair amount of ownership. So you're not going to lock him. I'm not going to play him in every single lineup, but I could see myself playing 60, maybe 65% of them across both spots. And most of that, and if not all of it, is probably going to be at flex. I don't know if I'm going to get there at captain, but if I end up getting 4 or 5 lineups with him at captain out of my set, I'm not going to exclude him, right? If the optimizer really likes his chances of being in the optimal, I'm probably going to go with it. We'll have to see. Next up, we got James Conner, $8,600. He's arguably the most interesting captain on the slate. So I like DeAndre Hopkins, right? We talked about his upside. He's just been on a tear. But James Conner is an extremely volatile player. You saw it highlighted last year. I mean, last year he had plenty of games with sub 10 fantasy points, and then he had multiple 40-plus fantasy point games, multiple 30-plus fantasy point games where he absolutely murdered slates. You had to have him for DFS at least a handful of times last season. And though he's been dealing with injuries, he's hardly even been able to play this year. He's $8,600, and he's seemingly healthy. And I know this team, right, has not looked as good as it was last year. He's still got that range of outcomes in him. Now, sure, it's a much lower percent chance after injury with a sorry team, but it's still out there. And I don't know. I've got a little feeling about this game here because the 49ers have been on a run. They haven't won all that convincingly. I mean, the defense has been a little bit lackluster. I mean, compared to the last 2-3 years, their numbers aren't nearly as elite as what we've seen there. They do have a lot of young talent. Now, granted, I think the 49ers next year are going to be even better than what we see this year. But their rushing defense, I don't know. I want to see them tested. I think that James Conner's got a shot to go out there, have some success, and he's only $8,600. And because of that boom-bust upside, I mean, typically when James Conner hits, he's going for 20-plus fantasy points, right? He's going to score a touchdown, get you that 100-plus yards. He does contribute through the air as well. And if he ends up busting, that's why we're playing multiple guys in a GPP. That's why we're not locking a player like a James Conner. And at just 32% at the flex spot, you don't have to lock him by any means, right? You can play him in about 50 to 60% of lineups and get leverage there. Or at the captain slot, I mean, if we think the Cardinals are going to win this game, James Conner is going to have a lot to do with it. So if we're going with a Cardinals heavy stack here, maybe a 3-3 or a 4-2 in that direction, he makes a lot of sense in those lineups. I mean, because they're going to feed him the ball if they have anywhere close to a lead. If it's a competitive game, he's going to get even more touches. So if you're looking at 3-3s, kind of like I mentioned with a Garoppolo and McCoy, I don't hate using James Conner, even with a Colt McCoy in the same lineup, because he does have that PPR upside, and he's going to get even more touches if it is competitive. And again, I think both quarterbacks are, I don't want to say only viable in a competitive game, but it's most likely that they're viable in a competitive game. So I don't know. James Conner's seems like that sleeper pick for me on this slate that I'm going to be getting to a lot more than other people. DeAndre Hopkins is a pretty obvious name. His ownership is just going to continue to rise throughout the day, so he's not going to be nearly as under the radar. Next up, we've got Deebo Samuel. So Deebo at $8,200. You got to like the upside. Like in the past, right? We've seen Deebo Samuel just go off for 25, 30 fantasy points. He's dealing with a lot of issues because of CMC. CMC demands a massive target share. A lot of those gadget plays that they were setting up for Deebo Samuel are now getting set up for a CMC. So a lot of his drop in production is due to the emergence of Christian McCaffrey. The upside here is that if McCaffrey doesn't get the snap share that we're hoping for, and that happened with the Panthers multiple times this season, they wanted to get the ball to CMC and they couldn't. Deebo Samuel could be the beneficiary. And if I'm going to play an Arizona heavy stack, That draws me to Deebo Samuel because he is technically a wide receiver. He gives you a little bit more of receiving threat there. And if they're going to play from behind, or at least in a competitive game, I think Deebo might be the guy that you want to get to as opposed to a McCaffrey. And that obviously isn't from a projection standpoint. I mean, look, Deebo's projected for 14 points. Christian McCaffrey is projected for 21 points, but there's also nearly a just over a $3,000 gap in terms of their price there. That makes a massive difference. We talked about before how that, $5,000 at the captain slot could help you spend up for maybe somebody like a 49ers defense for another quarterback. All of that matters when it comes to the showdown slate, and is why I still think he brings quite a bit upside, and potentially even more upside at the captain slot than a CMC, and especially if we're going with the Cardinals heavy stacks. In terms of our value tier, we don't have to touch on them as much. A few fades I want to go through. So first off would be Brandon Ayuk. I think he's just a little bit too highly owned right now. So obviously throughout the day, ownership projections will change, and I'll remind you, if you want access to all of my projections as they change throughout the day, check out my Patreon. There will be a link in the description of the video. You get access to the sheet that you see here. I do them for all the major showdown slates. I do them for the main slate every week. Also have golf projections. So if you're ever wondering, where you could find these sheets and get them for yourselves, so you can copy and paste them into optimizers, do with it what you wish in terms of your own analysis, that's where you find it. But Brandon Ayuk, we're going to have to keep an eye on his ownership. If it stays around 30%, mid 5-10% range there in terms of his captain ownership, he's probably going to be a fade. I mean, there's just too many faces there. I mean, George Kittle, right? He's still going to see more snaps than an Ayuk because they need his blocking upside. You have a Deebo Samuel out there. They're going to put CMC at wide receiver from time to time. Juwan Johnson has started to assert himself in the offense. You can't play everybody up top, and I see myself fading Brandon Ayuk. Also probably fading Rondale Moore. So I like the fit with Colt McCoy. Have to say that. Definitely an advantage for Rondale Moore. But he's $6,600. He's expensive, and I don't know if he has the upside we're looking for. I mean, he's just got such a short average depth of target. He's got great yards after catchability, but a lot of that is boom or bust. So if we were talking about a really low-owned pivot play, I think it would make sense. But again, he's 20% owned, 5% at the captain slot. I mean, that's lower than a Brandon Ayuk, but it's not nothing. He's still getting significant ownership, right? You got to play like 40% at the flex spot to get leverage, and that's getting into the gray area for me. So I'm not sure if I'm going to end up playing. I'm probably not, particularly if the ownership stays around where it is right now. But I do like Eli Mitchell. I do like George Kittle. So Kittle's going to be on the field more often, has a little bit more of a stable workload than a Brandon Ayuk. So that's why I like him more. He's also cheaper, and he's right around the same ownership. So that's really why I'm getting to a George Kittle. Eli Mitchell I like because of game script. I mean, if we're looking at the Vegas line expecting the 49ers to kick ass here, then you have to want to play Eli Mitchell probably in a CMC. Eli Mitchell is much more of your traditional running back, able to run between the tackles, get you yards after contact, and that's what you're going to need from playing from ahead, especially when the other team knows you're going to run the ball. So Eli Mitchell, I think, is especially viable if you're playing a San Francisco stack. If I'm playing the Arizona side, right, maybe a 3-3 or a 4-2 for the Arizona side, I'm not playing any Eli Mitchell. So he's very much so script dependent, not somebody that I'm just mixing in. Like a George Kittle, you can play in any game script, literally any game script. Deebo Samuel is probably the same way. DeAndre Hopkins is certainly the same way. But, guys like these quarterbacks, James Conner, for example, obviously Eli Mitchell is like the poster child for this. You really got to think about the game script that you're playing on whether you can actually use them or not. Because they have very specific avenues for success that they're limiting a lot of their potential outcomes. I don't love the defenses, so you can see I don't have either one in my pool. It's just such a fringe outcome for them to end up optimal that I don't love getting to them to begin with, particularly when they're $5,000 and they're getting ownership. So just not my favorite play. You can't play everybody, obviously. Talked about Juwan Jennings. He's started to get more and more snap share, more and more target share in the offense, so I like that. He's only $4,400, so a lot easier to fit into lineups. I do like the kickers, most notably Robbie Gould. I like his chances to go out there. On the team with the higher implied team total, they've shown a willingness to kick field goals. A lot of other teams will go for it between like the 30 to 40 yard line. Robbie Gould has had plenty 50-plus yard field goals this year, so there's part of the opportunity there is a little bit higher than most kickers. Robbie Anderson's like your ultimate flyer play. Now, I don't even know if he's going to end up playing tonight. I only project him for 3 fantasy points. But I don't know, if he's active and we get any sort of positive news from a beat reporter that he's going to be running more snaps than he has so far, he's a great play. Keontae Ingram, I mean, we've seen the Cardinals in the past. They've used Eno Benjamin as a backup. Back when they had Chase Edmonds as a backup to James Conner, they used him quite often. So we know the backup running back for Arizona is going to get run. So I only have him for 3.1 points, but if that run ends up resulting in a touchdown or, a big catch, a big run, that sort of thing, he doesn't have to do all that much to end up in the optimal $2,600. But the best play on the slate, we're going to save it for last. Sorry, we're going to go to Kyle Juszczyk first. Kyle Juszczyk, $6,600. Super cheap, right? Flyer pick. You're just hoping he scores a touchdown for you, which, he's going to get touches down in the red zone from time to time. You've seen it multiple times this year already. It's not crazy for Juszczyk to get into the optimal, but he's definitely touchdown dependent. So keep that in mind there. But getting to our top play of the slate, it's Trey McBride. McBride, I have at 32% right now in terms of his ownership. That has to go up throughout the day. We know that Zach Ertz is out. He's going to be your primary pass-catching tight end. People were really high on him to begin the season. I mean, even with Zach Ertz out there, people thought that Trey McBride was going to end up going off. And he really should be at least like 50, maybe even like 70% owned. And as of right now, I have him 35%, a little bit close to 36% between the two spots there. He's a borderline lock at that ownership. Now, if he gets close to like 50 to 70%, then you have a decision to be made, right? So you're going to have to keep an eye on the ownership as the day goes on. But at these current levels, at just $1,000, I'm probably playing him in every lineup, particularly because we have a CMC on the slate that we want to play. These quarterbacks, we can try and jam in both of them because they're in the 9K range. I mean, DeAndre Hopkins is, projecting off the board at $10,400. It opens up a lot of flexibility. And I mean, if you want Trey McBride and a Kyle Juszczyk together, I mean, you have like $48,400 for your last 4 spots. You could literally play a McCaffrey, a Hopkins, and these 2 quarterbacks and have space left over, right? You don't even have to play both of them together. So it opens up some interesting permutations. And I guess, right, you have to use somebody at captain. I guess that would be like pretty much spot on, right? If you use CMC at captain and then went with these 3, I think you might be able to make that a lineup there, right? So that's the kind of upside they bring you. But most importantly, Juszczyk a little bit more of a flyer pick. McBride might be a free square. We're going to have to check the ownership by the end of the day. But at his price tag, projecting for nearly 7 fantasy points, is somebody you're probably not going to want to avoid. All right, guys, that is all I've got for the Monday Night Football preview. There's no golf this week, so we're going to be focusing a lot more on the NFL side and probably for the next month. There's a few scattered golf events, but with the extra time I have, I'm going to dedicate it towards the football side, which, I'm typically putting a lot of the same analysis into my projections. We're not typically always putting that same sort of analysis into my projections. I don't always have the time, though, to go out there and put it into content form. So, when I have the time, I'm going to go out there and do so. So expect that over the next month. If you haven't already hit that like button, though, make sure you go ahead and do so before you get on out of here. And if you haven't already subscribed to my channel, I would highly recommend you do so too, so you don't miss any of that content to come. We're going to have main slate content this week, again, probably over the next month too. And for all of the major primetime slates, we're going to have these sort of breakdowns, right? Where I go through the scripts, go through each player, kind of how you can use them, and show you guys my projections, right? Now, it's the early set, right? They're going to change throughout the day, particularly if there's injuries to account for. So make sure you join the Patreon if you want truly an all access pass. But that's all I've got, boys. Best of luck with all of your lineups tonight. Any bets if you decide to go out there and maybe take a shot on the, I'd take the spread, right, on the Cardinals. Seems like a pretty solid bet to me. That's the side that I would be on. Probably the Cardinals spread in the over in terms of points would be what I'm looking at. But go ahead and let me know your thoughts down below, and I'll catch you guys next time.